Good morning, everyone. My name is Dan Nolan, president of Hugh Johnson Advisors. I'd like to welcome back those of you who've participated in previous sessions and welcome those of you who are new to our sessions. Today, we're going to have a panel discussion on a topic that I think is really pertinent to restarting our economy and restarting our businesses. I'd like to start by thanking our partner, the Times Union. Casey Seiler, the editor of the Times Union, is with us today, and he will shortly introduce our terrific panelists who will begin a discussion on human resources and workforce issues. Why are we doing this? This is an opportunity for those of us who run businesses, own businesses, in any way are involved in restarting businesses to talk about challenges and solutions. We hear a lot of information about the virus, about possible vaccines. We hear lots of information about numbers, and we hear about restarting the economy, but there's no playbook for restarting the economy. And restarting the economy means restarting our companies. And so the purpose for these sessions is to give all of us an opportunity to discuss challenges, to discuss possible solutions, to have a community conversation, if you will, about restarting our businesses. We start every session with an overview from my partner, Hugh Johnson Advisors, on the economy. And believe me, every week we learn more about what is happening with the economy, and we get more insights into how we think the economy may restart. So I'm going to turn this over to my partner, Hugh Johnson, who's going to speak for a few minutes about what he sees about the restart of the economy. Hugh?
Hopefully you can see me and hear me. Let me just thank once again on behalf of Hugh Johnson Advisors, thank our great partner, the Times Union, for doing this and joining us in what is really an important community event. And I want to particularly thank all of the panelists and of course, all of the people that are joining us today, that are logging in or whatever the right expression is, joining us in this event. My role in this, as it has been for the last couple of sessions, is to try to give you an overview, a little bit of a sense as to what I think is going on in this world of ours as we try to reopen and recover both the national economy, the state economy, and of course, what's important to all of us is the Albany community and what's going on with the Albany community. What I've done in the past is to start with something of a more upbeat sort of a comment. I've looked at all of the stock market corrections since 1890. There have been 25 of them. I've seen all of the bear markets that have been accompanied by recessions. There have been 24 of those. I've looked at all of the pandemics and all of the epidemics, particularly those that are accompanied by recessions. And there's one thing they have in common, and this is my upbeat comment, and it's an important comment, and that's that whether we're talking about bear markets or corrections, or we're talking about pandemics, epidemics, the one thing they have in common is they all end, and this one's going to end as well. Each one of them has a sort of a different timeline. They all have had different timelines, and we can take steps to try to change that timeline. I think one of the steps that's important to all of us now is to pay very close attention as we try to sort of reopen and recover, pay very close attention to healthcare professionals, as opposed to, shall we say, our political leaders, unless our political leaders are paying close attention to healthcare professionals. And I think one thing that's maybe not unique to New York State, but is a good thing about New York State is we have a governor that's obviously paying very close attention to healthcare professionals. And I certainly have to applaud him and congratulate him on his approach to the whole process. When I talk about what's going on today, quite frankly, there's some bad news and there's not so bad news. And the bad news is the US economy, of course, has started a recession. It started in the first quarter. The economy contracted at a 4.8% pace. It really didn't start in the first quarter. It really started more specifically in the month of March. And we know now, having looked at the employment numbers for the month of April, which we saw last Friday, that the decline or the contraction in the economy certainly continued in April. The month of April, it's hard to even repeat the numbers. They are so staggering. But the non-farm payroll employment in the US contracted or declined by 20.5 million workers. And the unemployment rate increased from 4.4% up to 14.7%, the highest unemployment rate since June of 1940. Now, we don't have numbers yet for New York State or for the Albany Metropolitan Statistical Area, but I think you can make some estimates based on the national numbers. And if I were to guess or estimate what happened in New York State, it would be that New York State probably lost 650,000 jobs and the Albany community about 20,000 jobs. So what we saw in the month of April, what we saw in March and April, most notably in April, was not particularly good news. The current forecasts or estimates of a 25% contraction in the second quarter are not outlandish. In fact, even forecasts of a 40% contraction are not outlandish. This will make this the worst quarter in history, or in the history since we've been keeping the numbers since 1947. So that's kind of the bad news. But you have to look closely at the numbers. And if you look closely at the numbers, you see one set of numbers that's not so bad. And that is that those that are unemployed, 78% of those that are unemployed describe their condition as temporary. That's the highest we've ever seen. The second highest, the previous high was in 2001 when 17% described their condition as temporary. So what does that tell you? It tells you this. It tells you that we're probably going to see, as we start to recover, as we start to reopen and recover, probably a quicker increase in non-farm payroll employment and employment numbers than we had expected. And most importantly, we'll see a very rapid decline or significant decline in the unemployment rate. Now, not everybody that's describes themselves as temporary is going to get back to work right away, but nevertheless, that's pretty good news. So when you get through some bad numbers for April, which we'll see in the next couple of weeks, retail sales down 12%, production down 12%, we're going to start to see May numbers. And when you start to get into May, you're going to start to see things like a 4 million increase in payroll employment for the month of May, 3.5 million for the month of June, and so on and so forth as we go through 2020. The numbers are going to continue to get better and better as we go through 2020, and that's really good news. Of course, when you look back at 2020, it's still not going to be particularly good reading. We're going to see that the economy contracted 3.7% for the year as a whole. We're going to see we lost 12 million jobs, but nevertheless, the direction, and I think that's important, the direction that's going to start in May. is going to start in May and continue through the remainder of this year is going to be a positive direction. And we're likely to see that direction continue during 2021 and 2022. If you want numbers, I'll give you 4.9% for 2021 and 2.8% for 2022. So positive direction. I'm often asked about employment. People are worried about employment. They're worried about the fact that we're increasing the supply of money so rapidly. I don't think employment's or consumer prices, the consumer price index is going to be a problem, certainly in 2020. I have it at 1.2%, down from 2% in 2019. It's probably going to pick up a little bit of a change from my first two forecasts of this series. Probably going to increase a little bit in 2021 up towards that 2% level. So that may start to become a little bit of a concern for the Federal Reserve. So that's inflation. Third, Federal Reserve policy and interest rates. I don't see any change in Federal Reserve policy. They're not going to raise interest rates anytime in 2020. Maybe when we get to the end of 2021 and into 2022, when we start to see a little bit of upward pressure on prices or inflation, and the economy looks like it's recovering, I think they might start to lean towards restraint or raise interest rates. But between now and then, interest rates are likely to be very, very stable. Consumer spending, even though we're going to get a lot of folks, they're going to get jobs. Remember this, consumers' balance sheets have been very damaged and their confidence is very low. So they're not going to come back quickly. It'll probably contract in 2020 and an expansion, a slight expansion in 2021. And then finally, stock prices. I think, a lot of people ask me the question, Hugh, how can you reconcile the fact that we're having such bad economic numbers with the fact that the stock market is holding together or doing fairly well? And the answer to that question is really simple. Investors are doing what we are doing. They're looking ahead, and they're looking at the third and the fourth quarter of this year. They're looking at 2021. They see that, yes, earnings are going to contract maybe 20% this year and expand 25 to 28% in 2021. They're looking ahead and they're pretty optimistic about what they see. Market, in my judgment, is a little ahead of itself, about 9% too high, but nevertheless, I think the market's looking ahead and it likes what it sees. There's two big risks. You know what the risks are. The first risk is we restart the economy or try to restart the economy too soon, and we have sort of that second wave. That's a real worry. We've got to pay attention to healthcare professionals. And the second risk is, of course, we're spending a lot of money. Our deficits are going to get pretty high as a percentage of gross domestic product. They're going to get up around the 10% level. And that might invite the Congress, not in 2020, not in 2021, but certainly 2022, to consider increasing taxes. I've given you a lot. It's not a bad outlook. Prospects are fairly good. Yes, the second quarter is not going to be good, but I think we're on the course to a meaningful recovery in the remainder of 2020, 21, and 22. So there's a reason to be reasonably optimistic, but recognize there's some risks.
Thank you, Hugh. As you can tell from Hugh's comments, we're in an economy right now that is unprecedented, a word that perhaps seems overused these days, but it's probably the right characterization for where we are. And so now we all have the novel exercise of having to restart our businesses. And so today we're going to talk to you about human resource and workforce issues, and we'll get started with our panel. I might just mention that for those of you who were not able to join us for our workplace safety or our access to capital session, you can go to tu.com and get replays of those sessions. And so now I'd like to introduce Casey Seiler, who's the editor of the Times-Union. He'll introduce our panel and get us started. Casey?
Dan, thanks a lot, and thanks very much to Hugh. Before we started this call, we were talking about Eric Larson's new book about Winston Churchill during the Blitz, and hearing Hugh talk about numbers that go back to the 1940s. It's a reminder that the long view offers certain consolations in very tough times. For more of a sense of where we're at right now, if I could make one programming note, tomorrow at 9 a.m. on these same platforms that you're watching this program on now, I will be talking to Don Levy, the director of the Siena College Research Institute, about a Times-Union Research Institute poll that just came out earlier this week talking about Capital Region residents' attitudes towards both the coronavirus crisis and what people think is next. And many of the issues that we're talking about today involved in what will make people feel safe when they go back to work. So I tout that. You can go to Eventbrite to sign up for it, and hope you'll join us then. But to turn our attention to today's discussion, I'm very happy to be joined by a really outstanding panel. And that includes John O'Connor, who is Executive Vice President for Human Capital at Mohawk Fine Paper, which is based in Cohoes. The company has a workforce of roughly 800 people. Miriam Dushane, Managing Partner of Alaant Workforce Solutions, a recruiting and staffing company based in Albany. And attorney Joanmarie Dowling, whose Rensselaer-based law firm specializes in labor and employment challenges. There are, of course, a few challenges bigger than the ones that employers will face in the coming weeks. I want to invite Dan to join in as he sees fit. And I would also like to tell the audience that if they have questions that crop up over the course of the discussion, to please post them under this YouTube or Facebook Live presentation. And we'll be looking at them, and we'll devote the last 15 minutes or so of this conversation to trying to address as many of those as we can. So with that, let's jump in with our very first topic. If all or part of a company's workforce has been effectively working from home for the past 2 months, should an employer attempt to bring them back? And can they require those workers to come back? And I might pitch that one first to Joanmarie Dowling, but we really want this to be a discussion, so anybody else on the panel, and Dan, of course, should feel free to jump in. So Joanmarie, what are your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Casey, and thanks to Hugh Johnson and the Times Union. This is such an important topic, and it really is. We use the word unprecedented a lot. I think listening to the numbers, that bears that out. We're certainly seeing it from the employment perspective. These are very, very different issues than what any of us have really dealt with. It reminds me a little bit of a story that I heard from a friend of mine who was talking to her executive team about COVID-19 and their numbers. And they found that actually working remotely, they did better. Their numbers are actually better than when they were in the office. So the funny part about it, or the interesting part about it, was the next discussion was, well, how do we get back to normal? Which is a pretty funny thing when they're talking about actually doing better working remotely. I think a lot of us have patterns that we're used to, and this is really kind of throwing all of us into a situation where we have to be thinking creatively and strategically about what makes sense for our businesses. And it's not necessarily our first instinct. So when we hear discussion about the economy, restarting the economy, starting to open things up and starting to return people back to work, if you have all of your workforce or part of your workforce working successfully remotely, I would say, hold off or think twice about immediately returning everybody back to the work site. I think that there are ways that we can phase people in over time, and those who are working successfully remotely maybe should stay there for a while as we work on other parts of the workforce that can't work remotely. Working off-site is not an option for a lot of employers, and certainly borne out in the unemployment numbers that Hugh was just talking about. For those people, we're looking at phased or phased restart, so bringing some employees in at a time, or staggered work schedules, or those sorts of things. Always we're focused on what needs to get done on site, what can be done at home, and really looking for the business considerations for how we bring people in. Ultimately, we're looking to avoid having COVID in the workplace. There's obviously huge business and safety implications for that. So we want to make sure that we're careful to avoid that second wave. If work must be done on site, to the question that was posed, can we require employees to come back? And the answer is yes, but it depends. Because we're lawyers, we always have to caveat. There are actually a number of different things that we have to think about. One obviously is we have to make sure that we have a government order from the governor's office that allows us to bring those folks back. So while I don't like the notion of calling anybody essential versus non-essential, we have to look to see that people actually fall into the right categories. Second, we need to make sure we have a safety plan that would satisfy the OSHA requirements for employers, and making sure that we are prepared for what we need to do to make sure that folks are safe. Individuals may be entitled to leaves. So we had FMLA and paid family leave already, and they still potentially apply here, but we have other special COVID related leaves. So if an individual is entitled to leave, for example, because they're caring for a child who would have been in school or daycare, but that school or daycare has been shut due to COVID, they are entitled to leave, and we can't require them to come back. And then finally, individuals with known disabilities may have an accommodation right. So we may be required to accommodate their inability to come back if their disability causes them to be susceptible to COVID-related complications. So we would need to go through that process and consider remote work as an accommodation or additional time off as an accommodation to their disability. So if you've addressed all of those points and they're not entitled to leave or an accommodation, then in that case, you could require employees to come back to work, and their failure to come back to work could affect their ability to qualify for unemployment benefits or other benefits that might be available to those who are out of work.
John or Miriam, do you want to kind of weigh in on that question? Or John, perhaps it's best pitched to you with a large employee role. How has Mohawk Fine Paper kind of addressed this question of when and how to bring people back to work?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you to Times Union and Hugh Johnson Advisors for allowing us to be here today. You know, Mohawk was deemed essential right from the beginning. We supply a lot of material to the healthcare industry, the legal industry, energy and environmental. So from the get-go, we were allowed to have our employees continue working. But we made the decision right away that those that could work remotely should work remotely. So of the roughly 340 employees we have locally right here in the Capital District, it's split about evenly between union and non-union. And our non-union folks are our production folks and running the paper machines. And we needed to have those people continue to be here. It's impossible to run a paper machine remotely. But we mobilized our IT group and got everybody out the door very, very quickly. And what we found was we were successful working remotely. But it also came with some challenges. Some people worked very well remotely, and some people felt even more anxious working remotely because they lost that connection. You know, I think we built a culture around here where where we work better together. So as we move toward May 15th, which is right now the governor's lifting the stay-at-home regulation, we've already made the decision that we're going to wait until June 1st before we actually bring anybody back in to the office. And you know, as we do that, we're going to do it in phases. We're not going to bring everybody back in at once. We're sort of building a plan where we're going to have a red team and a blue team. And so they will alternate weekly so that we generally have around 50% of normal office employees on site at any given time. And, there are a lot of challenges, as Joanmarie had alluded to, with leaves. I mean, it changed every day. There was a new regulation or a new law. But the thing about our company was, because we are over 500 employees, a lot of those leaves did not help many of our employees because they didn't apply. So what we did was we just kind of dealt with things on a case-by-case basis, because obviously there were issues with childcare, with schools closing down, daycares closing down. We had, people that might have been living with an elderly parent, or their spouse or child had an underlying condition. So it was really, managing all of those individual circumstances as they came up on a really a daily basis. And so as we come back together, we're not going to force anybody to come into the office. I would like to believe that what's going to happen is that people will choose to come back or not come back, and then we will deal with those individual cases as we've done from the beginning.
John, how are you communicating with your folks?
Well, what we started from the beginning was we have a daily update that goes out to all the employees, and we draft that every single day. And it's sort of a, state of the business. Here's how the business is doing. Here is what we're doing inside of the business to keep people safe and healthy, especially our production workers who, I can't liken them to, frontline people like healthcare workers and fire and police, but they have been doing the job for us as a company, and they are on our front line as far as we're concerned. And so we're very proud of all of them. And we've spent a lot of time making sure that they're safe, cleaning and disinfecting. So daily updates every single day that get emailed and sent out to each and every employee.
What are other best practices? I'm fascinated by the idea of kind of structuring the return with sort of a red team and a blue team to sort of fend off the idea that the workplace is going to get packed with people once again. But what are some other best practices that companies can employ? I just open this up to the panel. One question, for example, is should managers come back first? That's something that I think a lot of companies have been engaging with, that, the captain ought to be the first person on deck, as it were.
Well, I mean, in our case, we've had, people come, I mean, managers have been here, but it's been a mixture of people that say, hey, look, I gotta do this one project. And it'll take me 2 or 3 hours. Can I come in? And all of those have been funneled through me, and it's not necessarily a manager. So I don't know that we're going to have a situation at our company where there's going to be a group of people that say, well, you go first. I think we're all in this together, and we're going to collectively put together a plan that keeps everybody safe. And we're going to have, we've talked about having stations around the office, cleaning and disinfecting stations. We've hired additional cleaning people that just walk around and clean doorknobs and the bathrooms and the faucets and the sinks. And they're just constantly walking around and doing that as people are using those. There hasn't been much activity in the office, but so I think it's really important to just kind of do this in a phased approach, baby steps, and make sure that everybody is comfortable, and you're keeping the anxiety level down, and you're dealing with individual cases as they arise.
I want to pitch the next question to Miriam. How can companies manage recruitment and onboarding in this type of difficult environment. The Times Union, I should note, has two very talented new employees who were just literally had boxed up their apartment, their house, and were prepared to move from Virginia and from Ohio. And of course, they were completely interrupted. They've started work, but they've never set foot in the office. They have met their coworkers only virtually. So how can companies effectively seek out the best people, which is a process that should always be ongoing, and bring them on in a way that is meaningful and effective in this type of environment?
I think some of the challenges, I was listening to Joanmarie before saying how a company showed that they were being more productive, but they still wanted everybody to, when can we go back to normal, go back to our office? And I think that has to come with the culture of the organization. A lot of times it's much harder to maintain some type of company culture when everyone's working remotely. And so the feel that the company has is always important to the executives and the managers to make sure that comes together. So when you're looking at your workforce and you're looking at recruiting, you have to devise different ways to emulate that, and you have to do it virtually. So, organizations that we work with that were very easily able to transition to remote work because their technology was in place, obviously had a leg up when it came to the shutdown that we had. So pretty much like in a blink of an eye back in March. And so what we've been doing with our organization and assisting other companies is we've been, obviously we use Zoom for all of our interviews. We were doing that before, COVID really was around. And then we had also transitioned all of our onboarding to an online format that can be easily accessible to people that we're working with. So I know companies are moving in that direction. They're getting everything online so that forms can be completed online. Companies are developing training programs that can be done. A lot of times organizations, if they have larger groups of people that are hired at the same time, they'll have a company orientation for a day or two in a conference room with tours and those types of things. So moving that all virtual, having people log into the platform that they're using, and then conducting that same training remotely, offering an opportunity for the new employees to interact with each other, at least virtually, is a really good start. Another thing to think about when you're recruiting is if you don't have this in place, try to get some type of virtual tour or an ability to show a prospective employee what the environment is going to look like. Engage as many employees as you can through virtual platforms so that there is that ability to meet each other virtually, so you have faces with names and not just voices over telephone lines. So, creating that culture during the onboarding process virtually can be done. Is a little bit harder. Yeah, absolutely. Is it harder to get people together? I find in some ways it's easier to get people together because there's less conflict with meetings. Meetings are ending on time now because people aren't having side conversations.
Mm-hmm.
People have been very respectful for Zoom, virtual meetings where I haven't had a situation where people are really late to meetings and those types of things. So, what we encourage is just take everything that you've done on site and just transfer it to the virtual platform that you're using, whether it's Zoom or Microsoft Teams or something else, and just keep doing the same things you were doing. You don't really have to sacrifice all that much. It's just a matter of taking everything, and instead of being in a room full of people, you're now on a Zoom platform full of people doing the same exact things.
And Miriam, are you getting questions from recruits about safety practices at the employers, and what should we do as employers to address that? Should we be proactive?
So I think it's really important for an employer who, if they had a good brand strategy before COVID started, that they continue that same brand strategy. So, pushing their culture and those types of things. However, it has to be a change. So, making sure that if you are posting a position online, that you are expressing how the interview is happening, how the training will happen, when would they go on site, How long is it a remote job? So, making sure that you're specifically addressing those issues that are top of mind with everyone. When you are actually starting the interview process with a candidate, be very upfront and set expectations on what's going to happen. If there's going to be Zoom meetings, how many? Are they going to be in group settings? Are they going to be individual? Whatever that might be. There are cases in which the very final interview is done on site because a company feels very strongly that a person come on site to the organization. And so what I encourage employers and job seekers is make sure you're setting the expectations. Are there special instructions for entering the building? What type of face covering do you need to have? Where are you going to be, who are you going to be exposed to? And making sure that you're setting those expectations for job seekers so they can become very prepared for it. And what I encourage job seekers is if an employer is not being specific, it's okay to ask those questions. What do I need to do? How do I need to show up? What special entrance or instructions do I need to have? And so it's a two-sided conversation all the time. But I think being very transparent, being very clear up front, what we're finding is a lot of people are not even applying to jobs. And there's a number of circumstances that could be a whole other reason, panel to talk about that. But you have to be very clear, and so that the people who are still looking for positions and reading your job postings know what's going to happen from the moment they apply that role to the time that they start.
I would add to that some of the challenges that we've faced on our union workforce, if we're hiring for those types of jobs, we have to do actually a physical test that they have to take that's actually timed. And so it's very difficult. We haven't really had to do much of it during this period, but it's something we've been thinking a lot about how to manage that if something like this were ever to happen again, because you actually have to time the test. You can't email it to them and let them take it. So those are some of the challenges just on the union side. I agree completely with Miriam on the non-union side. We've been doing interviews virtually, and we've actually made a couple of hires during this period without actually having them physically come to the office. So, but there are always challenges.
I think that's more and more of a trend, with technology companies and other organizations that I work with that are more in the habit of hiring people that never set foot in their office, that might work in New York City or in California, but they work for an Albany-based company. Those companies are a little bit more familiar with that and more comfortable with that. But I think we're going to see a shift where more and more individuals and companies are going to be more comfortable with the virtual meetings rather than flying them in, seeing the workplace, those types of things, especially if they're going to be a virtual or a remote employee anyway. And I also see a shift in, companies are going to reassess the ability to have people possibly do more of a hybrid work. So, be in the office when they need to be in the office, but, have a little bit more flexibility to work remotely as needed as well, just to, one, I think productivity, I see it on my own team. I have a team of 10 and all of them are telling me that they're getting more done and they're being more productive. But what happens is what we are all missing, and that I'm trying as a manager to do really hard, is to keep the company culture that we had. And doing that remotely and virtually is more work. It is harder to do because you have to even be more over communicative and really be keeping people feeling like they are connected to each other. And I think that's why a lot of companies prefer on-site work, because it's not just about getting the job done. It's about the culture and the overall employee camaraderie that comes with working in a facility all together.
Right. I completely
I think
agree
that's
with that.
it's important. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, John.
I was just going to add to that as well as the updates that we're doing every single day, every Friday at 4:30, we're having a virtual happy hour. And it begins with Tom O'Connor, our CEO, just giving us a State of the Union, 7 minutes. And then everybody just, stays on and has a cocktail and just chats about business or about anything else that that they want to chat about. We've learned an awful lot about people just by watching them, virtually in their homes. And, we had last Friday was Hawaiian shirt virtual happy hour. So that was quite interesting.
We had our first Zoom trivia night in the newsroom, and it was a gas. I'm struck by a message that I think we're getting from all the panelists, which is that while this crisis presents the greatest challenge to your business's culture, it also presents a great opportunity to kind of establish and extend that culture going forward. That this is a time of great opportunity as well as great challenge. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Absolutely. And, being more creative, like John was saying, we're seeing the same thing. I'm town halling with industry professionals across the country and learning what everybody's doing in their different businesses to keep that culture and that communication going. And we had Disney theme last week for our office. So, I think it is a way to really bring everyone together even more so. But there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity to save money and identify efficiencies in your organization that you might not have done before because you were just, working in the office and this is the way we've always done it. Well, now we can't always do it. This is the way we've always done it. And so more creativity is emerging from this. And I'm finding employees are more creative. They're more efficient. They're being more productive. And at the end of the day, we want to see each other, but at least we know that a job is being done and our customers are being served and are happy. And that, obviously is a way to bring a good culture together and camaraderie as well.
And we hear they're working longer hours. Is that true?
No.
We hear from a lot of
it depends. I think it depends. I think if you're someone like myself who, when you do work at home, occasionally you tend to just get your work done and you might not, look up and, oh my goodness, it's 6 o'clock at night. I've heard that. On my team, I feel like they're doing way more in the 8 hours allotted. So we're not seeing overtime. We're not seeing people working even more and more hours. If anything, I've encouraged them to make sure they take a lunch hour, make sure they're getting up constantly and taking breaks and going for walks or doing something that they might do in the office. When we're in the office, we're not sitting there 8 hours a day just working, because we have interaction with our coworkers. We're talking about situations, we're solving problems. And so what I've done as a manager is just encourage that with my team. And I do not believe, at least for my organization, that my team is working longer hours, but they are getting more done in the 8 hours that they have allotted. And I'm giving them more flexibility. If they feel better working from 7 o'clock in the morning till say 3 in the afternoon or 4 in the afternoon, fine. If they can do that and everything's getting taken care of, it's fine. If I'm a more of a later morning person, I prefer a 9 a.m. start time and accordingly. So I think it's giving employers the ability to give their employees flexibility. And I think employees are actually feeling a little bit more autonomous about their work that they might not have had before because their manager isn't in the same room with them or in the same office space as them. And managers are finding that the cream of the crop is rising to the top. The ones that are your A performers are showing that they're A performers right now. And it's also an opportunity for employers to evaluate their workforce and see, where they need to devote time to professional development and keeping those A players growing, and where they might need to be coaching and mentoring employees that might be having a little bit more struggle with this.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no, I was going to say, just with the remote work, I think we will see some challenges, I think, as people continue to work remotely more, if not exclusively. One is, is managing time, and especially for non-exempt employees. So those are the people who are eligible for minimum wage and overtime, and we have to track their times, their ins and outs. That can be a challenge for employers and for employees, for what counts as work time and what doesn't, and what breaks count and what don't. And so if you talked to me 6 months ago, I'd say don't have non-exempt employees working remotely. It's too challenging. And now we're in a situation where we have to be creative and really try to think. That's, I think, where we see good communication, good boundaries, and more sophisticated supervision. It's not enough. I think a lot of times supervisors use the eyeball test. So you see the person's in at the time that they're supposed to be in, they're in their office, they don't seem to be on their cell phone, so they're probably doing okay. And where I think part of where we are starting to see efficiency, perhaps, is because we have supervisors who can no longer just rely on the eyeball test. They now have to actually know, what is it that my team is doing? What do we expect to accomplish today, this week, this month? And it's forcing us to use different muscles. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it really does cause us to have to rethink how we communicate our expectations. We can't just rely on running into somebody in the kitchen or on the way out the door. We have to be thinking about what it is that we expect, so that we have accountability built in the process. And, if the cream is rising to the top and some people aren't, maybe this is an opportunity for us to understand a little bit better, what's working and what's not.
I keep wondering what's going to happen the first time somebody sneezes in the newsroom, which of course used to happen every 5 minutes, but the first time it happens when everybody comes back, it's going to be something akin to kind of firing off a pistol shot. Well, that's really all I had. And with that, I'll hand it off to Dan, who hopefully has received some questions from the audience, and we're still taking them if anybody has any. I would, before I hand off the gavel, as it were, I would like to remind people that tomorrow at 9 a.m. I'll be talking to Don Levy of the Siena College Research Institute about a poll that we just conducted on attitudes towards COVID-19 and the return to the workplace. So with that, Dan, I'll hand it back off to you and thank our panel very much.
Thanks, Casey. So here's a difficult one. We talk a lot about what we know we have to follow, OSHA rules and so forth. But we're all trying to create cultures that are positive cultures for people to work in. What do we do? Not what do we have to do? What do we do, and what resources are available when we have workers that become anxious?
Well, I'll just jump in and say, I think we've already heard one of those suggestions, and that is from John, in terms of communicating on a very frequent basis. For some organizations, it may be a different, it may be daily, or it may be every few days, or it may be every few weeks. But I think speaking to people proactively about what the employer is doing and what's going on with the organization, both from a safety perspective and from an economic perspective. I think that having very visible signs of what you're doing, so not just telling people this is what we're going to do, but actually really making it visible. So I'm just reminded of going to Walmart a couple of weeks ago, and they had somebody who was cleaning right as I walked in, very visibly wiping down surfaces. And what a great visual that was. I don't know if it was intentional that they had the same person cleaning the same racks the whole time, but it was a great thing, I thought, for just helping to reinforce what the employer's commitment in that particular area, what that was. So, I think communicating early and often, and then I think actually reaching out and talking to people about the plan. So, oftentimes supervisors are the ones who are doing that outreach. They don't necessarily understand all the leave and all that stuff. To be honest with you, John and I have both been doing this for a long time. It was challenging, I think, for both of us to be doing these kinds of things. I know for many HR professionals and lawyers. But if we have supervisors reaching out to people and say, look, this is, we're working on the plan. Here are some of the elements of the plan. We'll be continuing to talk to you. Is there anything that you need from us, either now, during this transition when you're not working, or if you're working remotely? And is there anything that we should be considering as you as we work on this transition plan. And that gives people an opportunity to say, I've got, my mother lives with us and she, is susceptible to complications of COVID. Or I have a special needs child at home who, even though they are over the age of 18, they may still have issues, or there may be other challenges or concerns. Starting to get those out, not necessarily so that the supervisor can respond on the spot, but really so we sort of can collect and start to talk about strategies for each of those employees.
So let's take it one step further though. And you have an employee that doesn't have those reasons for underlying anxiety, no elderly parent at home, no childcare issues, just someone who's anxious and I don't want to come back. What resources are available to help those folks?
Well, I'll jump in. I guess, I believe our employees feel very comfortable coming up and talking to me or anybody in HR, and it would start there. We certainly have an employee assistance program that is employer paid that they can access.
Mm-hmm.
There is connected to our medical plan. There is a telehealth program. As part of the telehealth program, not only is there medical, but there is also psychological and psychiatry. So you could go to those two levels, either remotely, virtually, and visit a doctor that way, and talk through some of the issues you might be experiencing. So, I think it's important to have those types of communications and understanding with your employee that those resources are available.
Yeah.
And I think managers and supervisors need to understand that everyone is handling this situation very differently depending upon the circumstances that they're in. So I was thinking the same exact thing with the EAP program, making sure that people are reaching out to their employees, that they feel it's safe to talk to their employers and their managers, and that the managers know what resources they might be able to direct those employees to, whether it's an EAP or going right to HR and getting the guidance that they need. But I think, extra empathy might, be something that everybody has to work on, and how I handle a situation is going to be quite different than how someone else might handle a situation, mentally, physically, stress, whatever it might be. So just, over communicating and making sure that employees have safe zones or have a comfort level where they can go to managers, HR, whoever it might be, I think is really important, and making sure that you do know where your resources are or where you can direct your employees. It's not going to solve the problem, but at least they'll have ways to access support if they need it.
And Dan, if I may, I should have noted, we're going to put together a list of some of those helpful links, including to OSHA and some of the federal and state entities that have provided some advice and counsel on best practices for workplaces. And we'll make that available to the participants on this call. And of course, it'll be up on timesunion.com later today.
Perfect. And Miriam, here's one for you. What are you seeing for activity of manager/executives versus non-manager positions in recruiting?
I actually would say right now, the hiring that we are seeing from our office has decreased. So it's not stopped completely, but there are fewer positions that companies are actively recruiting for right now. And I think it's just until they figure out how they're going to handle their business operations going forward. So we're already starting to see that loosen up a little bit, and employers hiring a little bit more. I actually have a mix. So right now we have a couple of executive level positions that we're working on for local organizations that are looking to fill. And I have a lot of line level would be the best way for me to describe it, positions open. So right now I think it's probably a good mix. Are our phones ringing off the hooks with organizations, clamoring to hire? No. But we do have consistent and steady business coming into our office. And I think one thing employers need to understand is we're hearing these numbers about the unemployment being so high. And so employers are naturally thinking that because the unemployment numbers are so high, there's this vast pool of candidates now they can choose from. And I'm here to tell you that that's actually not the case. Hugh Johnson said it earlier that most people who are unemployed consider it temporary. And so I lead that to look at, they're on furlough. They've already been given commitments by their employers that they're going to go back to the work, go back to work or go back to their office when they can. And so those people aren't looking for new jobs because they're perfectly happy with the employer that they're with. And if you want to go after those candidates, you still need to consider those candidates passive candidates. They're not actively looking for jobs. And a lot of times other people that have been really affected by this COVID crisis right now are people in sectors that may not necessarily have the skills that employers are looking for. And so, yes, there might be more people unemployed, but the candidate market as a whole for an organization, depending upon the skill sets they need, hasn't actually changed all that much, pre-COVID. So it's just something to keep in mind that, and people are being very cautious. So saying things like, this is how we're going to handle the hiring process, this is how we're going to handle the training process and getting you started is really important, because people aren't even applying to jobs because if they don't know exactly what's going to happen, they are thinking about their health and safety first and foremost. And employers who aren't communicating that aren't going to get applicant flow because the unknown is a very scary place right now.
Hugh, here's a really specific question for you. Why are payroll numbers always non-farm payroll? Why is farm excluded?
Well, that's a really good question. I really can't answer it. And that's probably because if you take a look at history, farm employment, just hang on one second. Farm employment used to be a significant percentage of total employment. And of course, that was in the early 20th century, and that's changed as we moved to an industrial economy. And now we've moved to let's call it an information systems or technology-driven economy. Farm employment has become far less important, and that's really been the principal focus of most people. There's no particular reason. You could look at farm employment. You could look at non-farm employment. Some of us look at both. Most of us look at just non-farm employment. But it's become significantly less, and it's become significantly less a percentage of total employment, largely by all the kinds of things that you would expect, the progress in technology, which has really reduced the level of employment on farms. I think that would be the most, it's a tough question.
Thanks, Hugh. And so as we move here to almost 10 o'clock, let me turn to the panel and say, are there any questions that haven't been asked that you think should have been asked? Are there any words of advice, final words of advice that you have for us? We just have a few minutes left.
I guess I would say that it's been very difficult. It's information overload, and we've relied heavily on our partners for the best and most accurate information. I think it's very easy to go off on, this tangent or that tangent because you're getting an email from a source that you never heard of before, but you see the words COVID-19 and you see the words returning to work, or, and you can very easily fall into just, too much information. So I would say, communication is important from your employer. Ask questions if you want some answers or you don't understand something, and the employer focus on, hopefully you've got some good vendors and they're supplying you with accurate information, and we're all in this together. So it's tough.
No, I mean, I think that's excellent advice. I don't think I could say it any better. Your HR, legal, insurance, your financial folks. I mean, all of those folks really are looking at different aspects, but so related. And this touches on so many different things that certainly be informed and read up, but also look to professional advice and rely on those folks
Miriam, final words?
I was going to say the same thing. I mean, I'm a recruiting expert, but I look to, Joanmarie for my legal advice, and I look to my financial advisor for the information I need on that. And I think the biggest takeaway is that make sure you have trusted sources, trusted partners and vendors, and understand that they are all here for you. To help you as best that they can. I know I was on the phone with Joanmarie the next day after everything started to shut down, and she's been hand-holding me every step of the way. And I think it's good to have a nice arsenal of vendors and partners that you can rely on who are experts in their field, so you can focus on your company mission and your employees, and let the experts do what they need to do to help you succeed in your business.
Great. Well, there's no question that we're writing the playbook for this. We've not experienced this before. We're all making it up as we go along. And I think sharing these ideas, challenges and ideas are helpful. A couple of quick takeaways that I think were interesting from today are culture is harder, but it's probably more important than ever to try to reinforce and continue to build your culture. Secondly, we've all got to be flexible in dealing with back to work, whether it's coming in stages, dealing with anxiety. We've got our work cut out for us. Resources around like OSHA and others that, Casey, thanks for the reminder. We're going to publish some resources later today that employers can access. I love the idea of using your vendors as resources. And then finally, over communicate. I think we've heard that from everybody. Get out with your folks, especially because we're getting closer and closer to getting back. Let's over communicate and try to make folks as comfortable as possible. So a final paid political announcement. We're going to do this again next Tuesday. I think we've got a fascinating topic. It's going to be on retooling your business, new go-to-market strategies. What are ways that you can reinvent yourself, reinvent your company? And it will be next Tuesday at 9 o'clock. So Casey and our panel, thanks to all of you. Thanks to all the participants. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you've all learned something. We'll see you next Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.